Glen, Tracy, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's really good to see you,
Thank you for
Risa.
having
Thank you,
us.
Risa.
No, thank you guys. I'm so excited. This is, who doesn't love talking about real estate and buying real estate in Los Cabos? Um,
Absolutely.
I know. Before we
We
kind of
always get excited, sorry.
what?
We always get excited when Los Cabos starts getting mentioned in these podcasts, so thanks for having us.
Well, rightfully so, right? Um, you guys have really figured something out down there, which is amazing, and we're going to share some of that information today. But before we kind of get into it, Glenn and Tracy, we met many years ago on a shoot for House Hunters International, and that's when you bought your place, which was a nice serendipity that we got to meet, and since then have had this nice friendship. And then Jonathan, I would love to know you're an attorney in Los Cabos, and I would love to know more about what you do. So before we kind of get into some of the technical stuff, Glenn and Tracy, why don't you give the audience a little bit of background on where you're from and why Cabos, so Cabo San Lucas, and now the fact that you're real estate professionals.
Absolutely. I'll let Tracy do that. She does a better job than me.
So we're originally from South Africa and then in 2000 moved to Canada. While we were actually living in Canada, we came here on vacation and fell in love with Cabo, went home, bought our first place sight unseen. And we used to use it VRBO, vacation rental, for quite a number of years until Glen actually got a transfer to Tampa, where we uprooted and moved to Tampa, sold our place, and then at the very beginning of COVID, we just thought, what are we doing? We always wanted to go and live in Cabo. Let's sell up, and ended up buying our same exact place back, and landed here at the beginning of COVID, which was the beginning of 2020. 2020.
Yeah, just kind of really at the beginning of 2020. And, we always had Mexico in our sights. It was something that we were always going to do. We actually bought our properties in 2011, right?
11.
So in 2011, we started this journey. And, between Canada and the US, we just always knew we were going to come back. And when we did eventually come back, we came back without a solid plan. And it was when we met you, Risa, and did the House Hunters episode. And through that House Hunters episode, we met our broker, Leroy Jarvis, at Cabo Cribs. And he said, you guys should be selling houses. And so we said, well, you know what? That's a great idea.
It's actually something that we had always thought we wanted to do.
Yeah.
So we jumped right in and did our training, and 2 weeks later we had our first accepted offer.
And
we haven't looked back since.
No, and we've been so busy. We've been so busy, and I like to think we've really provided a fantastic service to people just like us who have made that leap, and whether they're coming here permanently or whether they are just buying an investment property to rent it out. We've been able to talk and help people from a really different perspective, having done it ourselves, and it lends a lot of credibility to that process when people are coming in and buying for the first time. It's nerve-wracking, and it's why folks like Jonathan, great lawyers and great companies, give our clients the peace of mind that they can navigate this properly.
And actually, for the last couple of years, we've been team leaders in our company, in our brokerage. We have a team of 9 agents that work under us, and for the last couple of years, we've also been the new agent trainers. So we train all the new agents that come through our brokerage as well.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Well, it's not to sound boastful, because that's not the intent, but it's been kind of cool because when you teach something, you learn a lot more than when you're just doing it yourself. So, we run these 12-week programs. We have the School of Real Estate affiliated to Cabo Cribs, and through that School of Real Estate, we have experts come in and teach. Jonathan does his class every one of those weeks, and So over a 12-week period, we end up training people who have either no experience or limited experience, or they're agents in the US. They come here and then they need to learn Mexico. And so we spend 12 weeks, we get them licensed, and they go off and start selling homes here in this area.
That's great. That's so great. That's so helpful.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. Yeah.
Important too, right? Because
Yes.
selling real estate or buying real estate in Mexico can be very different than buying real estate in other parts of the world, including the United States and Canada. So tell me a little bit, Jonatan, your background. Where are you originally from? Your training, and how do you fit into this kind of whole puzzle of purchasing real estate in Mexico?
Sure. Well, I'm from Mexico City. I spent all my life there, but I always have the dream to live in a place like Cabo. So this was part of my dreams. So basically, in 2020, when COVID begins, I was wondering with my wife if staying in Mexico City could be a good idea, or maybe move right now to another place could be a good idea. With COVID, everything changed. Everything was moving really fast, so we thought that it was a really good opportunity for us. So I start making some calls, trying to have some colleagues with me in this dream, and we achieved it after some months. So we moved to Cabo, and we started this law firm. I started this law firm with another two more lawyers, and it was fantastic. I used to work for one of the best law firms in Mexico City, and I have a lot of experience with real estate and with foreigners trying to buy things here in Mexico and trying to stay here not only for vacations. So I use all my experience in order to give to all my clients better services than the one that you could find here in Cabo. One of my main services, of the law firm, is regarding the closing of properties. Here in Mexico, foreigners need to have a special process in order to buy properties. So it was really important to have a really good team, experience and knowledge about how to do this. So that's why we start here, and that's why we met with Glen and Tracey.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's awesome. Because, well, first of all, right, it's not required, or are you required to have an attorney in any kind of real estate transaction? Or is that, I'm assuming it's highly advisable. I mean, I don't think anybody should go into buying, such a large, make a large investment without an attorney. But tell me a little bit about your experience. Glen, you were mentioning before the call about what happened to you when you were purchasing your property.
So I think it's absolutely critical to always have a lawyer involved. If you're a national, meaning a Mexican citizen, there's a slightly different set of rules, and it's a little easier. And in many instances, and Jonatan knows the details of this, I don't want to step on his conversation, but you could go and use a notaria. It's not the notary like we know it in the United States and Canada. It's a lawyer who's well educated.
And I think that's a big point. People need to understand that, because a notaria here is like a government appointed lawyer.
So
very highly qualified lawyer that signs off on the title of your home.
Yes, and so using a lawyer who's well educated in Mexico, has gone to all the right schools, aka Jonatan and his team, gives you that overall umbrella of security, which is no different to the United States. You mentioned earlier that the processes can be quite different, but really they're different, but they're not, because we still put money in escrow, we still have a closing process, and we still go through all the steps that are required to get all of those titles legalized and all the legal work that basically we do the sale. We introduce our clients to Jonatan, and then he takes over to a large extent, and then he manages them through the entire process of closing.
And I must say something else that we have really found so so useful for us. If we are dealing in a sale, even before the client is ready to make an offer, if there's anything we are unsure of, we can make a phone call to Jonathan, and in a few minutes he will answer us, and we are able to, again, relay those answers directly to our clients. And that has been vital in a lot of our transactions.
So the fun part about all of this is, this, unlike buying a home in the United States or Canada, it's a negotiation. But when you have someone who comes to Mexico or to Cabo San Lucas to buy a home, they're not just buying the brick and mortar, they're buying a dream, and they're buying in a country where they've never bought before for the most part. And there's always this anxiety level of, well, you know, how safe is it? This is where Jonathan and his team come into their own. They are fantastic at really laying out the plan from the part where you purchase the property to the part where you get your title. And they do it in such a nice, pleasant way that the whole interaction between Tracey and myself and our partnership with Baja Legal Group and Jonathan is that we create a fun environment, a non-threatening environment that helps people feel more secure by sending their money over into Mexico. And that process actually is quite, Jonathan can speak to that, goes into a US escrow, you know, good faith deposits and so on. So it's different, but it's not that different. It's still a titling process.
And their whole team, both written and speaking, they are so good in English that, again, it's very comforting for our clients, because most of our clients only speak English.
Yeah, and that's the one thing with Cabo San Lucas, or Los Cabos, which is the combination of San Jose and Cabo connected by the corridor. That's our little world. We find that we're now getting this grouping of little cities across the East Cape to La Paz to Todos Santos, where we're finding people are 75% of the population are still buying in San Lucas, but there's another 25% that are looking outside of the city and buying in the beachfront properties and so on. And so those types of purchases where you're buying land, for instance, versus a residential home, requires a different set of expertise, you know, and it's not like one thing fits all. And so we always rely on Jonathan, and you know, he could talk about things like due diligence and making sure that, you know, they go into that. I'll let Jonathan speak to that part, but it's quite cool what they do to make sure your client's protected.
Well, before we get into that, and this is a question for all three of you, actually. So when you have clients come in, what kind of, not mistakes, but maybe mistakes, or what kind of education, or what are you finding they really need to know that perhaps they don't know, right? They're asking questions, or in what ways do you find that you're guiding them? And that
this is a classic.
I think the biggest misconception that everybody has is that they only having a 50 or 100-year lease. They all believe that you only have your property and it's a leased property.
And why do they think
And
that?
I think
Because there's all sorts of weird websites on Facebook, and you know, everyone's an expert, a Google expert, and you go online and you're not talking to lawyers, and people are all like, whoa, you know, and it's this broken telephone syndrome that somehow happens, and they're getting the wrong information. And this particular topic somehow is permeated to the top, and people, like Tracey says, will come and say, well, you know, do we really own our property? And the answer to that is absolutely, you own your property. It's just protected in a trust, a bank trust.
it would be nice for Jonathan to explain that.
He's the best guy to answer that one.
Yes, I agree. I believe that's the most common mistake that all the clients made when they are trying to buy something here. Here in Mexico, our constitution states that there is some restricted zone for foreigners. So basically, a foreigner cannot buy directly in all this area. Why? Because it's near to the beach. So basically, that's why you can't buy directly. But you can buy using a trust, a Mexican trust, also called fideicomiso. In order to incorporate a Mexican trust, you need a permit, and this permit only is granted for a term of 50 years. So when you explain this with not the enough context or background, they believe that they are leasing the property only for 50 years, and that's not true. Just to clarify this permit have a term. After these 50 years, you could request for a renovation of that same permit for another 50 years, and after that doesn't mean that you are going to lose the property. The only thing is that you are going to need a new permit. You are going to pay again for the permit, and basically that's all. It's not a lease. It's nothing like that. It's a Mexican trust. You have full ownership, and everything is perfectly secure for everyone.
That's great. And that's
And
actually
within
properties that are purchased within the restricted zone, right? Which is 50 miles,
Yes.
50 kilometers from the coast, and then 100 kilometers from the border.
From
So
the
it's not
border.
all of Mexico. It's just essentially
No.
all that prime real estate that is right on the water, like Cabo.
And
Correct.
it actually encompasses the whole of the southern Baja where we are, is in that restricted
Because we're just
zone.
on that little sliver of land, so by default we're by the ocean, nowhere to go. So we fall within that grouping. But you're right. Like if you were in Mexico City, you wouldn't have to worry about that. You know, it's just the different areas. What's cool about it too is, and we tell our clients this, is, you know, most people want to have a beneficiary, and you know, whether it's your son or your granny or whoever it is, and you want that on title. Now this is the way Jonathan and his team does that, but also your bank trust. If ever anything happens to you, you know, there's a formalized mechanism that your trust is registered in this trust, bank trust, and in by default protects your investment and protects your beneficiaries. So it makes it a little easier if something did happen to transfer your property over to them.
Are there other mistakes that you see people making, whether it's like, you know, to the point where you're like not even hiring the right professionals, the right attorney, or, you know, I feel like some people might try to do too much on their own. All the documents are in English and Spanish, right? But mainly Spanish.
That's a really good point. First of all, I believe one of the biggest mistakes is that in order to provide legal services here in Mexico, you need to be a lawyer. So if you want a real estate advice, you need to hire a lawyer. And unfortunately, here in Cabo, you could find a lot of closing agencies that they are not lawyers. They don't have the enough education to provide you the correct advice around buying a property. So that's something really important to clarify. And secondly, I believe it's another big mistake is that everyone believes that everyone is going to speak English here, and that everything is going to be in English and Spanish, and that's not true. Actually, there are some laws that only allows to have documents in Spanish. For example, the notario, the lawyer that Glen and Tracey already spoke about it, they are not allowed to speak English. They are not allowed to write anything in English. Everything must be in Spanish. So you will need someone that could translate you everything, that you could trust, and of course you want someone that could be liable of that translations that they are going to make for you. So if you're not hiring a lawyer, if you're only hiring a closing agent, liabilities are not going to be the same for a lawyer that for a closing agent, of course.
And something else that we very recently came across, it was our listing, so it was taken out of our hands, but they decided, the buyer decided they did not want to pay for a closing lawyer, and they wanted to work just directly with the notaria, and it was honestly the most difficult closing we have ever experienced. And again, for what Jonathan's saying, I mean, there's no English spoken, and it was really very, very difficult, and it's because they wanted to save a couple of $1,000s.
It's never worth saving $1,000 to try and figure out yourself. This is the best advice, and Jonathan's right. You can give anyone who goes, I don't care what foreign country it is. If there's a predominant language in that country, you want to use professionals, licensed professionals, who are experts in those fields that can help you navigate that, whether it's your driver's license, or going to set up your utilities, or buying a home, buying a car. Spend a little bit extra for that peace of mind. Use the experts, and you don't end up running into problems. So it's just a basic foundation for any type of situation where you're going to a new country and doing anything in that new country.
Right. No, that's so valuable. So like, if, for example, how do you guys work together? So what is some of the behind the scenes things that someone who's interested in purchasing real estate may not know? Because I know you guys do a lot that isn't necessarily apparent, right? You're going to just go buy, you have cash, you're going to go buy a $300,000 condo, whatever it may be. But there's a lot of stuff that you guys are doing, to make sure that the process is as smooth as possible. So can you tell me a little bit about what you guys are doing behind the scenes?
Yes, I think that's such a great question, because there is a lot going on behind the scenes to ensure that our clients are well informed and educated. Just coming back to the comment I made earlier about licensed professionals. Tracey and I are licensed professionals here in the Baja. Jonathan is a licensed lawyer at a very high-end prestigious school in Mexico. Making sure you're working with licensed professionals is the first step, and there's nothing wrong with asking people for their credentials. So that's the first thing, and I'd highly recommend you do that if you're buying a property in Mexico. Secondly, what a lot of transactional agents, and not all the agents are great out there, they just want to make a deal. Not a lot of them are necessarily disclosing things like the estimated closing costs for a property, right? So let's assume your property costs you $500,000. They don't ever have a conversation beyond that for the cost of closing. But you could factor in about 5 to 6% of the purchase value of the home on top of the $500,000 that you're going to have to come up with. So you'll have your 10% good faith deposit that goes into a U.S. escrow, but then there's legal fees for the closing, and that needs to be accounted for. So that gets wired to Mexico.
And something that we do quite early on, as soon as we realize that our clients are interested in a particular property, we will have a quick phone call or text to Jonathan and say, please prepare a closing costs estimate for our clients, and they don't even have to put the client's name, it's just the value of the property, and in very short order he will send us this estimate back that we can then present to our clients. And it's just being professional and letting them know exactly what sort of costs they are in for at the end of the day.
The other thing, Risa, that happens behind the scenes, for instance, when us as real estate professionals list a home, we have a very distinct set of criteria that we look for. Specifically, does the home have a lien or a mortgage against it? Who are the actual owners of the property? We figure that out. We do all of that work up front. Is this property titled properly? What kind of title does it have? What bank is it titled with? Because that trust might be with a specific bank where their board only meets every 6 months. And so that closing could take a much longer period of time than if we'd used a bank that does a meeting every month. So we go and we look at all of those. Land here, when you buy land, there could be multiple owners on that land. Familial history, where you've got 5, 6, 7 owners. All of those people need to be signing off on the listing agreement. You need passports for everyone. Then, once we've met all that criteria, which is also the criteria for MLS, where MLS has been established in the Baja Peninsula for 20 years now. We're one of the few states in all of Mexico that use MLS, and by default it creates this higher level of scrutiny when it comes to people. So we always recommend, when we meet clients right at the beginning, that we set them up on MLS, the searches, so they know when they're looking at those homes, that those homes have all been vetted out, that they're legit, and then that that job becomes so much easier for someone like Jonathan, who on the back end, once you have a signed offer to purchase, he gets that offer to purchase and he knows that already that property, for the most part, maybe there's a few surprises, is legit and it's going to be a fairly smooth closing. So
And-
that's a few examples of what happens behind the scenes.
And I think especially if clients are interested in buying land, we always suggest they let Jonathan do what we call a due diligence report. And he again, he can speak to that, but really that is making sure that those clients know that what they are putting an offer in on is actually what they're buying.
Land can be more tricky because it doesn't always have a very finite survey, for instance, or, like there's certain things that with land, especially if it's owned by locals and it's been transferred into title, can have some challenges. So this is where the due diligence process should happen on properties. An established home, residential home that's already been sold a few times, that's not a big deal. But when you've got a fresh piece of virgin land, it's always a good idea to work with a lawyer.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So Tracy and Glenn keep talking about this due diligence. Jonathan, can you talk a little bit about what that means to you, and what are you doing for your clients in terms of that due diligence, and to make sure that that transaction is going to go as smoothly as possible?
Of course, we have different type of due diligence report. It's a different one, the one that we are going to make for land, the one that we are going to make for a pre-construction condo, or the one that is requested in order to understand the title of the property that is already built. So talking about land, well, a due diligence report allows the client to know what he could build in that land, what type of land use he will have in that land, and what type of restrictions he could have. Also, this allows the client to understand any type of risks that we could find in the title research that we make every time that we make a due diligence. Talking about pre-construction projects or pre-construction pre-sales, in that case, our due diligence is totally focused on the viability of the project to be finished. We review the license, the permits, and each of the documents that law requests to the developers that could allow us to understand if it's going to be possible or not to finish what they are trying to sell. Because every time that you're interested in some pre-construction project, well, you need to trust 100% because you don't have nothing. You will see only the land and some renders in the computer, and that's all. So with this due diligence report, we help the clients to feel that they are buying something that is totally real and possible. And of course, well, the most common due diligence report is about only the title search. This title search allows the clients to understand if this property used to have any problems, if this was part of any litigation, or if this was part of some maybe big problem that you don't want to be involved if you want to buy a property here in Mexico.
Right, that's great. And that's so invaluable, right? It's like that's the kind of nightmare that you do not want.
Of course not.
Is to
Well, especially in a booming economy. In a booming economy like Cabo, there's 40 active pre-construction projects going on right now.
wow.
So, yeah. So,
It's shifted, because when we started selling real estate, the first year we never sold one, we may have sold one pre-construction property, and that was it. Everything was already built. And now the majority of our sales have turned into pre-construction developments, either house or condo.
Wow, that's really interesting, right? That shift.
yeah, it's very interesting.
So I have a question actually about living in Cabo specifically. I know that the Baja has the laws there are a little bit different, I feel like, than on the mainland. Would you agree? Are there some certain exceptions? And I don't know if that's related to real estate or just kind of lifestyle, in terms of like your car and all that kind of stuff. But there are some distinct differences living on the Baja, isn't that right?
Yes, there is. Actually, it's quite unique in that respect. A couple of things. We're an extension of the Californian coast, really, from San Diego down. We're about 1,000 miles south of San Diego. And as such, the Baja is what they consider a free zone or free travel zone, where you as an expat could bring your Canadian plated or US plated vehicle down and leave it here or leave it at your home and not have to have it removed or leave with you when your visitor's permit expires. On the mainland, that is the case. You either have to export your vehicle or you've got to leave, cross the border, come back in, and you can only do that so many times before they start saying, hey man, what you doing here? You know, are you a resident or not? So there are those differences. When it comes to Cabo San Lucas and the Los Cabos area, this area was voted the premier holiday destination in all of Mexico, and just recently it was between Cape Town, South Africa, and Cabo. They were the two top destinations, voted as the two top destinations, which I thought was quite interesting, being South African and now.
And Los Cabos is also the safest.
Yes, so it's
city
also
in all of Mexico.
Also voted the safest city, and we really don't. That is very true. We have very little crime. I think just in the last year, I think in the total Baja there was 14 homicides, and 10 years ago that equivalent would have been 500. So it's very low, and it's safe, and we have the added advantage, of course, with just very temperate weather. We don't have a lot of rain, so we have a lot of sunny days, and that's why you can come here and most likely guarantee your vacation. And hotel rates, for example, hotels. Your average hotel stay now is $550 a night on average, and with an 88% occupancy rate just this last December. So the hotels are full, but that also speaks to the opportunity of owning a condo or a home and Airbnb-ing it, because that same room would cost $300 or $250 a night. And so we have this market here that is just a renter's mecca and paradise, where you can buy something and you can guarantee that you're going to be able to rent it out and make good money on your investment.
And also people are seeing very, very good returns when they're buying pre-construction properties. We're seeing returns of around 30 to 40% on average once the home is completed.
So if you imagine you buy your home, for $500,000, and in a year at the time it's ready, and you're making 35 to 40 points at closing, it's kind of unheard of. But we see that consistently. The other thing in this market, like I mentioned, it's mostly a cash market. We do have some lenders here that will lend you some money, but there's a lot of strict criteria around how you borrow money, and they'll most definitely base it, if you're an American, on your FICO score or your overall credit score, and there's a bunch of hoops. There is lending available, but this market's mostly a cash market.
Yeah, I think that goes for most of Mexico in terms of
Yes.
the cash market, and there's definitely some upsides to having a cash market, especially for those of you who work in the industry as well, right?
Right. Now, Jonathan, I mean, I know you spend a lot of time working in Puerto Vallarta and those areas, and I know Jonathan is from Mexico City, so I could not really draw the comparison legally of the legal differences between mainland and the Baja. So if there's any others I've missed, Jonathan would be the expert to be able to speak to those.
No, well, actually, here in Cabo, in Baja California Sur, the one that you said is like the main one. There's another one that could be around taxation, for example, but it not applied to Baja California Sur, only applied to Baja California and all the other states that are just beside to the border. But it's interesting because there's a lot of different things that we have. For example, electricity. We are not part of the system that provides electricity to all the other part of the country, because we are for electricity purposes, we are an island, so we don't have this type of infrastructure. So it's different type of problems that we could have because we live in paradise, So there is some cost about that.
Interesting. I did not know that. Yeah. So, but I do know that there are some distinguishing factors in terms of living in the Baja versus the mainland. So, as we kind of begin to wrap this up, I'm curious in terms of where you see real estate going in 2024 in the Cabo area.
Well, I think we're in a seller's market. Excuse me. We're seeing a lot more inventory over the last 6 months. I think on MLS, about 6 months ago, we saw 1,200 properties on the Baja, and now we're at about 1,900 properties.
Just over 19.
So we're seeing a lot more inventory, which is quite nice. But we've seen a slight softening over the Christmas period, which is quite normal. But I think we're going to still see this trend. Cabo is kind of like that over the last 11 years. You know, you have this steady increase. So it's always a good value proposition. And that's mostly what buyers are here for. They're either buying to invest and just have an investment property, or they're buying something that they can turn pretty quickly and make a good profit on. Those are the two categories. So we're seeing all of that continue.
But I do also think that we're seeing a lot more people actually moving here full time.
That was the other point I was going to make.
And a lot, when we just made the decision to come down, I thought we were going to be living with a lot of retirees and older people. And I'm actually quite shocked at how many young families have moved down here from Canada and the US with little kids, and we have very good international schools, so they're putting them in schooling here and making a living. And I think also with the ability, again, from COVID, where they can work remotely. So there's definitely a lot more younger people here than what there probably was many years ago.
The other thing we have here, Risa, is we have a much more robust infrastructure when it comes to what Tracey's talking about, schooling, international schools, but also hospitals.
Medical.
We have very, very good medical systems in place here, from surgery to orthopedics to whatever, cardiac,
dentistry.
You know, all of that stuff is extremely good on the Baja, and we do find that we have those medical tourists coming here a lot as well for that reason. And we've seen an influx in the holistic medicine part of things, where people are coming here for their stem cell replacement, and people are spending a fortune. So just in a month, this market will turn about $100 million in a month. It's $1 billion annual, more than $1 billion annual market. So this is a very, very lucrative market for future investments, and I just don't see that going away. We are seeing so much growth in this area. What will happen is you'll see more diversification into what I referred to earlier, the polygon being Los Cabos, Todos Santos, La Paz, and the East Cape. And like I said, 75% of this market is going to continue to grow here in this particular area where we live, but you will see 25 of that diversified into those other areas, and we do see that already.
And places like Cerritos, Pescadero, Todos Santos becoming more and more popular.
And geographically, there's advantages, because the moment you're starting, you know, we're the best of two oceans here in San Lucas, because we're the tip of the Baja Peninsula. You've got the Pacific on the right, and you've got the Sea of Cortez, which is warmer than the Pacific. If I just go over 20 minutes towards the Pacific side, I'm getting much more temperate, cooler weather. When it comes to the summertime, that's quite attractive to a lot of people. So it really does appeal to a broad spectrum of buyers. But it's still somewhat, and I hate to use the term in Mexico, but Americanized. You know, you can use your US dollars here. You can go to Costco and they'll take your US dollars. You can
speak English.
You know, most people will communicate in English. And so it makes it easy to transition to Los Cabos.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Wow, this has been so great and valuable and informative. And so if people want to reach out to you, find you, get to know you, hire you, where do they go?
Well, they can contact us. I don't know if you want to put our email addresses on your
And our
screen.
phone numbers.
But, you know, it's basically Glen Muir at cabocribs.com.
Not just Glen.
Oh, sorry, Glen at
And
cabocribs.com.
Tracey at Cabo Cribs.
And then, you know, this is a team effort, and we couldn't do what we do successfully without Jonathan. Because he gives us that peace of mind that when we go and tell something to someone, we're not lying. We're telling the truth. We're not telling half-truths. It gives us a lot of confidence, and I think for that reason, Jonathan and his team are a big part of the reason why we're successful here in this area, because people they have fun with it, and it's easy.
I'll tell you something else, because Jonathan comes in on quite a regular basis, and he trains all of us in certain aspects. So at least when we are talking to clients, we are kept up with things, and we're telling them, you know,
The facts.
yes.
And the thing is, you know, we're not exclusive to Jonathan. Jonathan does these educational processes with lots of many high-end brokerages out there. So he's out there teaching everyone. And so we're all benefiting as a broker community by having folks like Jonathan and his team support us and educate us.
That's great. So, Jonathan, if people want to reach out to you, how do they find you?
Well, my Instagram is jespinosan. It's really easy. I have my Instagram is an open account, so you could send me a direct message, and I will be happy to answer all your questions and to be in contact with all your audience.
That's great. That's great. My goodness. Thank you so much, Tracey, Glen, Jonathan. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for having us again, and
Thank you, Risa.
we appreciate you doing this with us. It's so much fun being able to share this stuff with people, dispel a few myths, and help them understand that this is not scary.
Exactly.
This is awesome. It's fun, and we're living it. We have been living it, and we can assure people they'll have a fun experience buying a home here.
Living in paradise.
Pretty much.
I agree. Thank you so much, Risa.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Risa.